Welcome, everybody, in the Off the Ball Network fandom and beyond to your usual Wednesday night affairs here on the Off the Ball Network Twitter, Facebook page, and our YouTube channel as well. It is the Bunts and Bruises podcast. Starting off your Wednesday nights the right way before, at least for tonight, Cruise Island is going to get on the network, so that's going to be a good show as always. Our guy Cruz Mo may be on tonight, not 100% certain, but it's always fire when Mo is on. And of course, before you get to all that, we hope that you stick around for our show, the top hockey and baseball podcast on the network, and the fastest growing one on the charts, we hope, because of all of you. And of course, as always, your two men leading the ship is the Iceman Jurg kicking things off. And of course, I'm joined by my guy. He's not a wild card. Well, he's a wild card sometimes, but he is a true division winner, a true league clincher, ladies and gentlemen. James Barcia. James, how we doing?
Jurg, how you doing tonight, bud? I'm doing great. It's a lot of craziness going on. We got NHL starting. We got the MLB postseason starting. It's a lot going on. Just like my day today. My day was a little crazy, but here we are. Best time of the week. It's hump day. We're getting over the hump, and we're going to talk about some sports because it's just the greatest thing ever.
Of course, absolutely. And we're not going to waste too much time. We're going to get just about straight into it. We're going to start with the NHL stuff. It's a regular season preview and a little bit of a playoff preview today, guys, because, like James said, the NHL starting up preseason just began a couple days ago this past weekend. And, we're relatively quickly approaching that. It's in a couple of weeks, the regular season in and of itself. And the MLB playoffs next week, it begins. So BNB versus MLB for the ratings. Who wins that one? Probably not us, but, we're gonna give our good old college try, they say. But yeah, that's what's on tap for today's show, and we're not gonna waste any more time. Let's get straight to it. The NHL. We are going to tonight preview the Eastern Conference. So unlike last season where it was the four divisions, this time the NHL, everything willing, obviously, will have the regular format back. So it's going to be the Eastern and the Western Conference. And it's going to be the top three teams in each division automatically clinch spots. And then the next two teams are going to be wild cards based off of who finishes with the most points. So you could get on the Western Conference side, for example, you could get top three in the Central clinch, top three in the Pacific clinch. If the next two highest point earners are in the Central, both wildcard teams are from the Central Division. That is how it works now back in the usual format. This format's been around for a couple of years now, and then, it returns after a 1-year hiatus because obviously, COVID happened. But we are going to go over some of that, and what we're going to do a little bit different because, James, we could go through every team, but that would take way too long, and some of these teams just aren't that interesting. So what we are going to do, actually, is that we are going to go over the top storylines of the Eastern Conference this week and the Western Conference next week going into the season. Of course, along the way, we're gonna hit all the main teams. So don't worry, all the fans of each and every single team. We're gonna get to your club most likely, even if it's just parting mention. Buffalo. We are going to mention your team at some point in our breakdown. And of course, James, like I said, we're gonna start with the East and we're gonna start with the Atlantic Division because how can you start with anyone else aside from the two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning? It was an interesting offseason for the Tampa Bay Lightning this past summer. Lost quite a few pieces. It was to be expected after they essentially avoided a cap crunch after the Stanley Cup victory in the bubble. Didn't lose a lot of pieces. For the most part, that roster was kept together. They got to make another run, got to repeat as champions. Forget just back-to-back years, essentially like 2 cups. They got to hoist the cup 2 times within the span of like 9-10 months, which is absolutely wild. And this was the offseason where they were going to suffer losses. They knew it, and they did. Lost a couple pieces. Blake Coleman went to Calgary. They traded Barclay Goodrow to the New York Rangers. In the expansion draft, they lost Yanni Gourde. Just pieces left and right left this team eventually. But that does not take away the fact that, A, they've already won the cup, so they get the bragging rights. But B, they still have, for the most part, their core. They still have their top 3 defensemen on the roster, which I was kind of shocked coming into the offseason. I thought they were probably going to have to let go of McDonough, but they didn't. At least, like I said, shocking to me. Hedman, Sergachev, and McDonough are still there. Your forward core is still stacked as always, and assuming everyone is 100% healthy, and I believe they are to this point, it's Stamkos, Kucherov, Braden Point, Anthony Cirelli, who they were able to keep. Him and Andre Palat, the fact that they didn't lose either of those guys in the expansion draft just absolutely boggled my mind when it happened. And this team has some decent young depth. So, James, I want to throw the question to you. How realistic do you think it is for the Tampa Bay Lightning, your arch nemesis from last season, because you rooted against them in both the conference and the Stanley Cup Finals. How realistic is it, in your point of view, that they can three-peat and hoist the Stanley Cup for a third straight season?
I think it's really likely, Jurg, because honestly, I don't see really what's stopping them. Yes, they did lose a couple key pieces, but as you said, they kept their core together. And realistically, that's all you ever need when you're winning a championship. All those other pieces are pretty interchangeable. And I don't want to say the word replaceable, but if you can find talent, it's easier to find talent to replace on the outskirts of your team, the people who do the little things, than it is to find the majority of the talent, such as Kucherov and and the two other fellows you named because I forget their names. But regardless, the fact also it shows you that Seattle's expansion draft wasn't exactly the best ones, because you mentioned it to me after the expansion draft. You were shocked that those two guys were, at least one of them was still there. So the fact that it shows that Seattle did whiff towards the end of the draft, or just they didn't go for prime talent like they should have. Maybe they got something up their sleeve with Cap later on in the future that we don't know about. But back to the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think they should easily three-peat. The moment that the Stanley Cup final ended last year, I told you they were going to three-peat, because they just literally they breezed right through. Simple as that. And when you lose some pieces against the core, it kind of brings that challenge back. So like sometimes mentally you get a hangover or whatnot, which is what makes the third championship such a hard thing, because it's like, we did this twice already. You don't, as much as you think you're giving 100% effort, subconsciously, you're probably only giving like 80%, 85% effort. So the fact that it's going to become a little bit more of a challenge, I think also just adds on to the fact that they do have a chance to three-peat.
I think you bring up an amazing point, James, that I don't think is brought up enough with these title defense campaigns, is the fact that the challenge has returned for this team, that they lost some of the depth pieces that they had. And I think that's really interesting, because when you have an organization now that they've achieved the success, these guys, they don't need to prove themselves anymore, right? Steven Stamkos is the captain of this team. He's a bona fide all-star forever. Kucherov is a bona fide superstar. Hedman and Sergachev are bona fide studs, right? Andrei Vasilevsky, who not that I forgot to mention, I was just waiting, because that dude, probably the best goalie in the game right now. Like, none of these guys need to prove themselves anymore. So when you have that kind of situation, like you said, you can kind of be concerned, like, oh, well, are they going to lose that edge? But when you mention the fact that they lost some of their guys, and that just means that they need to be closer together while bringing along the new group of depth players who are going to support them, I think that's a very real point to bring up, because I think these guys are hungry for it. They understand that in this sport, there has not been a three-peat, at least since the New York Islanders did it back between the late 70s and early 80s. And even then they four-peated, right? So a team has not won 3 cups in a row since those Islanders teams. Decades, generations of hockey have passed by, essentially. Several generations have passed. We had Gretzky dominate, Crosby and Ovechkin, and then now Connor McDavid, right? Like, several generations of superstars have passed since the last time a three-peat happened in the NHL. And if there is a team that I think could accomplish it, I really do think it's the Tampa Bay Lightning, because to me, they're the most talented team, still top to bottom. You look at their top forwards, you look at their top defensemen, you look at their goalie. What team can really go up against them in a 7-game series? Because that's the thing. I feel like for the first time ever, I could kind of say this about hockey. I normally say this about basketball, but in a best-of-7 series, the team with the bona fide top talent is most likely going to win. Now, that doesn't always happen in hockey, but I feel like Tampa Bay is kind of breaking that code these past 2 years. And I do think they have a chance to do it once again. Like you, I at least have them three-peating as my Eastern Conference champions. Stanley Cup Finals, I'm not so sure yet, because if they face one or two certain teams, I think that could be the challenge. But I think everyone should have the Tampa Bay Lightning going to the Final Four minimum. Once again, minimum. But like I said, it's all about challenge, James. And who will challenge the Tampa Bay Lightning this time? So first, kind of like last year, we need to look at the division, because similar to last season, you face it's the divisional playoffs, essentially, in the first 2 rounds. As the number 1 seed, you're facing the wild card. So technically speaking, it may not be one of your division teams. It could be another team. But the second round opponent will for sure be one of your division foes. So within their division, there's a good amount of solid teams, right? It's the Boston Bruins, who have been a consistent playoff team for about the last decade or so. The Toronto Maple Leafs, who they've also made the playoffs consistently over the last 5, 6, 7 years, but they can never get past the first round. And the Florida Panthers, who made it to the playoffs last year pretty comfortably. They had a very good season, best season in franchise history. But, this is the key, but they lost to who? The Tampa Bay Lightning. So with those three teams, James, the Boston Bruins, the Florida Panthers, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think it's three different stories when we look at all those teams. I think with Boston, you have arguably, in terms of the top line, you have a top line that can compete against Tampa Bay. The Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand line is just absolutely dynamite. Those are all three guys who could put up 30 plus goals. Marchand and Pasternak especially have the potential to put up 90 to even 100-point seasons at the same time. On defense, you have the youngster and Charlie McAvoy, who could be pretty good for them in terms of leading the offense, leading that power play, which is what you need to have against Tampa Bay, especially. But I think the questions for this team is, will the depth that they added in the offseason do enough? Remember, if anyone that listened to our NHL offseason talk just weeks back, I think a month and a half ago or so at this point, my winners and losers, I had the Boston Bruins as one of my winners because I did like their offseason. I like the additions of Haula and Foligno and Nosek on the forward core. And I think on the defense, the additions of Riley and Forbert were good as well. So I did love the Boston Bruins offseason. The question with them is, can Linus Ullmark have a good year with a better team now in front of him? Because he was the Buffalo Sabres goalie last year, James. And the fact that he had a good to respectable season in Buffalo means that there's expectations now in Boston that they need to be able to do something. So I think with Boston, the question is about their depth. I think it's similar questions with Florida. Florida had added a lot of pieces between last year's trade deadline and the offseason. They traded for Sam Bennett, back last season, and they re-signed him to a 4-year deal. They signed Brendan Montour to, I think it was a 3-year contract, and they actually traded for, at the draft, Sam Reinhart from the Buffalo Sabres. Just all these Buffalo guys going to good teams. You got to feel good for them. Sam Reinhart had a career year last year in terms of goals. He put up a career-high 25 goals, 40 points in 54 games played. He adds another offensive dynamic to the mix. With Aaron Ekblad coming back, if he is good to go for the Panthers, that's going to be big because they definitely missed him in that series against Tampa Bay for sure. You miss your number one defenseman, that just hurts your team. But I think the question with them also runs with goaltending of, is their guy, the $10 million man, Sergei Bobrovsky, is he finally going to step up and play up to his contract? That's the big question, because there's a youngster in Spencer Knight who we saw in the playoffs, James, for a rookie. He was poised, right? You don't really see that from rookies a lot. And then finally, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. We know the story behind the Leafs, all the talent in the world. They have their core four: Marner, Matthews, Tavares, Nylander. And then you have a couple other solid pieces in Muzzin and Morgan Riley. And then it's just a bunch of depth on this roster, right? But just like I feel like this is a concern with all these teams here, James. Goaltending with the Toronto Maple Leafs. They allowed Freddie Anderson to go. They kept Jack Campbell, who had his phenomenal run last season. And they signed Peter Mrazek in the offseason, which it's not bad, but it's also not great. It's very much a who's who on who's going to get that starting job. Now, Mrazek did play pretty good last season for the Hurricanes, and Jack Campbell played good for them. So whoever gets the starting spot there, it's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation in Toronto, but they're not 1A, 1B in the league, like in terms of the tier they are. They're just 1A, 1B in Toronto itself. So of those three teams, James, who do you think, when you hear about all these squads, who would you give early edge to of who could potentially challenge Tampa Bay in the division this season?
I'd say you have to go with the obvious, and I think that's the Florida Panthers. Panthers say it's time to win now. If you look, like you said, it looks like it's time to win now. I got my list of players. Forgive me, guys, if I can't pronounce them. You know me and the names here in hockey. So, like you said, you got Barkov and Huberdeau.
You're close, Huberdeau,
and Ekblad. And that's the main core. Everything suggests that they're in the prime of their careers right now because that's exactly where their age is. And if you look at this offense, they led the NFL in shots on goal and was fifth in scoring last season. So, it's really, they're an offense that can compete. But like you said, Jurg, they need either Bobrovsky or Spencer Knight to step up and be that goalie. Because as we always say, when it comes to the playoffs, the goalie is the person who's going to win and lead your team. Just look at Carey Price over there in Montreal. He took them all the way, and that's why Tampa Bay looks like they're going to three-peat, because not only, like you just said moments ago, Jurg, they have the best goalie in the game, they also have the best offense in the game. So how do you stop that? Who knows? But if Florida could take the next step up in defense and offensively, and offensively, it's not even a big step they got to take. It's really, like you just said, defensively, just that little bit where maybe they could get a little bit more grimy and dirty, like the way Boston plays. I think they could definitely have the best chance out of everybody here.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's kind of why I give Boston the edge because I think Boston has some of the offensive talent to go against Tampa Bay. But it's they really beefed up not even their bottom six, their middle six, their second and third lines. And I think that's going to be the big thing when you compete against the Tampa Bay in this next playoff run against them. Can your second and third line beat theirs? Right? Because especially Tampa Bay's entire third line from these back-to-back cups are gone. Yanni Gord's in Seattle, Blake Coleman's in Calgary, Barclay Goodrow's with the Rangers. So because of that, can your third line match up against theirs? Can they overwhelm them? And can that kind of help, kind of shift the tide a little bit? Because I think for a lot of people, if you paid close attention to this past season's playoffs, as you did if you were listening to our show and as we spoke about it, I think what a lot of people will realize when it comes to playoff hockey, and this is kind of why it's a different game, depth really matters in the playoffs. And I think when it comes to depth, I need to give the Boston Bruins the advantage of these three teams here. Now, goaltending situation, I find it funny because all the two of these three teams have a new starting goalie, right? It's Toronto, potentially, if they run with Mrazek to start, and it's Boston with Linus Ullmark. But honestly, I'm the most confident in what Boston can do with their goaltending situation, despite the fact that one of their goalies is completely new to the team. I think the defense is relatively solid. I think Carlo there to help with the defense, along with some of the guys that I mentioned, and Matt Grzelcyk. He's a veteran in that locker room. I think there's enough there. A great coaching staff in Boston. I just think the Bruins have the ability, they have the wherewithal, they have the experience, they have everything in order to compete with Tampa Bay. So if I had to pick someone to compete with the Lightning, I think it's Boston because especially, we were kind of talking about, the outside the ice stuff, James. The last two postseasons, the Boston Bruins and the Tampa Bay Lightning could have potentially met up against one another, right? And actually, no, excuse me. So two postseasons ago in the Cup run, Boston and Tampa did meet, but Tuukka Rask was out. Right? And Tuukka Rask, going into the playoffs was looking pretty good in the comeback, but then he left the bubble. And Bruins fans fully believe that if Tuukka Rask would have been there or with them in the bubble, they could have defeated the Tampa Bay Lightning. So to Bruins fans, not really much of a slip up of what I've said before. They don't think they had their proper full team against Boston back in the playoff bubble. And then last season they had the opportunity, but they blew it against the Islanders. I think they held the series lead at 1.21 before losing 3 straight to ultimately, get knocked out of the playoffs. I think the Bruins believe that them as healthy as can be against Tampa Bay, I think that they think they can beat Boston and they can beat Tampa. And look, if they want to have the confidence, hey, more power to you because you need to have confidence in sports. I think we've always talked about that. You need to have the confidence. If you're the Boston Bruins, you kind of deserve it because you have the talent, but you need to have that confidence going against Tampa Bay. I want to talk about just briefly here before we move on to topic 3, James. The Toronto Maple Leafs. So you pick Florida as Tampa's biggest competition. I picked Boston. Now, I think there's a reason for that. When we had Logan Lockhart, the amazing man himself, on the first episode of season 2, and we had him towards the end of season 1 when we were talking about the playoffs. And one thing I remember when we talked about the Maple Leafs in particular, Logan mentioned, and I think it was real that he said this, I feel like the Toronto Maple Leafs are Tampa light, right? Like, honestly, if you compared those two teams, the only difference between them is the fact that the Tampa Bay Lightning are the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. Because Toronto has the supremely talent. Well, they had, if we just look at their roster from the previous couple seasons, they have the main core forwards. They had two pretty good defensemen there. Are Riley and Muzzin as good as Hedman and Sergachev? No, but they're still pretty good as a top-tier duo. And then goaltending. When he was healthy in Toronto, there were times where Frederik Andersen was absolutely brilliant. Just ultimately, the end of his tenure was marred by injuries and ultimately falling off compared to what Jack Campbell had to play up to in order to get that job. What to you, James, does Toronto need to do to finally prove us all wrong? to finally be that team that we've expected them to be for a good 5 years now and finally at least win a playoff series?
It's going to sound really dumb when I say it, but what they need to do is win. Simple as that. Because it's literally, they do everything right. They get to the point where you got to get, and they just slip up and choke. They just can't step up to the plate when it's their time to do it. It's as simple as that. Like you guys just said, they're Tampa Bay light. Yes, they may not be up. The reason why they're Tampa Bay light is because they can't win. They can't take that extra step. Simple as that. They have all the talent they need. They could be. That's why I didn't pick the Maple Leafs. I'm sure that's why you didn't pick the Maple Leafs. It's just simple as they don't win. It has nothing to do with anything about the actual roster, has nothing to do about anything with the actual numbers. You hear the Maple Leaf, it's an ongoing joke. The memes that were going on during the playoffs this past season, Jurg, was hysterical. You did nothing but keep sending me memes because they kept screwing up and missing the playoffs. So it's as simple as that. They just need to win. Like I can't even think of one thing they could do better besides win.
Hey, fair point, honestly. Like, at the end of the day, all this team needs to finally do is just finally get over that hump and win a playoff series. And then we can start talking about you as serious cup contenders again, right? Like, when they assembled their little core four, when they first got Tavares, when they extended Nylander to his big contract, and by then they also had Marner Matthews, the expectation was honestly that they were going to do something like what Tampa Bay did, at least win a cup, right? They haven't even won a playoff series. Now, granted, Boston has been a major factor in that, beating the Toronto Maple Leafs quite a few times. Oy vey, I think I just gave some Maple Leafs fans PTSD there. But nonetheless, like, if you're Toronto, at the end of the day, you have some solid depth on the roster this season. You added some pretty talented players in the offseason to support your core. You still have Kerfoot. You added Richie, Andre Casa on that team, David Kampf to help. I believe he's going to be the third or fourth line center, maybe the fourth line if Kerfoot is the third line guy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this Maple Leafs team, like you said, the talent is there. Just finally get it done. Like, case closed. Like, no further conversation needs to be held with them. Just case closed on that. So we can move on to the third topic when covering the Atlantic Division. How ironic, James, because this next question revolves the Montreal Canadiens, the team that eliminated most recently the Toronto Maple Leafs in a Game 7 in these past playoffs. I actually want to throw this over to you first, James, because you kind of experienced the 2020 postseason, but the 2021 playoffs was your like reintroduction into the intensity of the hockey playoffs. And like you mentioned earlier, yes, Carey Price did his thing. He absolutely did carry the Montreal Canadiens to the playoffs, but they were a very good team, right? They're the quote unquote playoff team that, myself and Logan have mentioned on episodes in the past, that they're just built for it, right? But this team is very much different this year. Shea Weber is going to be out for the season due to injury. He may even potentially retire by the end of the year. We're not sure about that. This team lost a couple of pieces in the offseason that I necessarily wasn't a fan of. They lost Philippe Danault. They allowed Jesperi Kotkaniemi to leave in the whole restricted free agent fiasco that we covered on the very first episode of season 2. They did, add a little bit of talent back into the roster. They, of course, traded for Christian Dvorak, which was a good deal. They signed Mike Hoffman and David Savard, former Tampa Bay Lightning, funny enough, in the offseason. They've supplemented their roster pretty well. But to me, I think now the problem is that you're not in the Canadian division anymore. That was a pretty weak division you were in. And even still, you ended up being the 4th seed in the regular season, James. We've already spoken about 4 teams in this division. 4 teams that are playoff caliber / playoff bound. Not even getting into the Metropolitan division yet, by the way, where there are other very competitive teams as well that they'd likely compete in the wild card. So, James, just, on a base level, what odds do you give Montreal of making it back to the playoffs this year?
What odds? That's a good question. I actually probably have them a lot better than some people, Jurg, because they're so good defensively that it really depends on how they do regular season building up to it, because the defense is there. They just need their offense to not perform the way they did in the playoffs, because that offense completely left them. Yes, they did make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final, but you and I know, Jared, that offense by no means was a good offense to make it that far. It was strictly on the back of Carey Price that got them that far. But I think defensively, besides Carey Price, you also got Philippe Danault, who finished top 7 in Silky Trophy voting, which is, for those who don't know, I had to Google it myself. It's for the best.
Man, he's gone, James. That's the thing. Like,
that's no, he's gone. What notes do I have here then? Either way. All right. So now that he's gone, now that I'm thinking about it, Jurg, my expectations just dropped dramatically because it was between him and Carey Price. So now that he's actually gone, and you mentioned the Jurg, I do not have them that high at all due to the fact that, one, I just said strictly defense. So there you go. There goes one of the biggest parts. And 2, like you said, the divisions are now back to the way they normally are, and they didn't do great in that new division thing anyway. And that whole division, as you said multiple times, was just a garbage dumpster fire. So the fact that they got that low in the weakest division of all the divisions in this whole new formula, and now they're going back to the original, which is 1,000 times tougher, it's going to be real tough for them. It's 50-50 shot, but realistically, it's like 40-60, 40 they make it.
I think it's fair. I think they definitely have their work cut out for them. when we talk about the Canadian division again, like while the Maple Leafs and the Oilers were there, they both lost in the first round. Like when you consider that, you kind of have to look back and be like, dang, that division wasn't all that good, man. Like, and we had to wait ultimately for Montreal to technically clinch. Now, albeit that was mainly due to Vancouver and Calgary. Thanks, boys. But at the same time, it was predominantly due to the fact that Montreal, like they put some space, but they weren't even that overwhelming compared to the two teams that they were above for a good chunk of the season. Like Calgary and Vancouver, at least Calgary's not that good, man. They're not that good. Vancouver, they should be better this season. Obviously, it doesn't matter because they're not in the same division anymore. But Calgary was not that good. Like, I just have concerns with this team. Look, I have all the belief in the world in Carey Price, but he also was banged up during this offseason. Remember, before the Seattle Kraken expansion draft, there was kind of talk about, what's his status? How healthy is he going to be for the draft? Should the Kraken take that risk, right, with drafting him? So just based off of that, I think there's, plenty to be concerned about. I think at the end of the day, Montreal, I'll give them a fair shot, kind of like you're saying. I'll give them like a 50-50 shot of making it back. But they need to play way above their heads this time. They can't just be a decent team. They need to be way more consistent this season. And can they get that with losing some of these pieces, get these new guys in the fold quickly? I don't know. I will say, I will be excited. Cole Caulfield is going to be making his proper debut. Now, he debuted last season. He played in the last 8 to 10 games, and then he played in the playoffs, right? This is going to be his proper rookie season. This is the beauty of the NHL, James. The kid can debut predominantly towards the end of last season in the playoffs, but now he's still eligible for the Rookie of the Year award, and I think he's going to have a dynamite rookie season potentially. Early Calder Trophy nominee. Like if I had to name my top 3, he'd be one of them because I think he's going to be dynamic for them. But they're going to need him to be that, considering what they lost and what they need to compete in that division for certain. Because like we said, this is all one division, right? So Tampa, Boston, Toronto, Florida, Montreal. Whew. Whew. That's tough, man. That's really tough. And again, the way it works is that the last 2 wildcard spots are between the divisions. So you're not just competing against your own division for a wildcard spot. You're competing against the teams in the other division in your conference. So it's not easy for Montreal to make it back this time. Last 2 topics really fast here when it comes to the Atlantic Division. We're just going to breeze through these. Which team is finally going to look like they are making some progress in their rebuild, the Detroit Red Wings or the Ottawa Senators? I'm going to make Kenneth really happy here. I'm going to say the Detroit Red Wings. I think Steve Yzerman has done a good job these last couple seasons of building up this team. I think this is finally the year where they're going to make some progress because I think some of the young guys that they've drafted recently are finally going to make a mark on the roster. I think Philippe Zadina is going to have a good year on the team. I think I'm assuming Joe Veleno should make the roster this season. I think he has to at this point. Michael Rasmussen is a good player. He's been there in the last 2 seasons, I think, definitely last year, but I want to say the last 2 seasons. I think he's going to have a pretty good year. You'll see, what his ceiling is on the team this year. Moritz Seider potentially could crack the roster. If he does, that'd be big. He's a part of the blue line of the future, and I think if he can crack the roster this season and show some good skills, then that's going to be big for them. I just have more confidence in the Red Wings that they're doing this rebuild right because of Steve Yzerman at the end of the day. The Ottawa Senators are terrible. they're bad. I have zero confidence in this team and what they're going to do this season. Matt Murray is still the starting goaltender, for the love of everything. That's not good. He couldn't stop a beach ball if it was shot at him. He just couldn't. It's not good at all. So I just have more faith in the Detroit Red Wings to actually perform better, despite the fact that, honestly, there are some pieces of Ottawa's roster that I like. I really do. I'm a big Thomas Chabot fan. I think Eric Brandstrom's finally going to have his year in the NHL. But I just have to favor Detroit. I just have to. And then the 5th question when it comes to the Atlantic Division, James, the Buffalo Sabres and how bad they're going to be. This is your mention, Buffalo.
Bad.
I'm just going to say this. In NHL history, the worst win percentage belongs to the 1975 Capitals when they went 8-67-5 on the season. The most losses in a single season in NHL history was by I believe the 1993 San Jose Sharks. They lost 71 games. Let that sit for a second. They lost 71 games. I fully believe the Buffalo Sabres are going to be terrible this season. They have a chance to be historically bad. Historically bad. And I think, geez, poor Jack Eichel. I mean, technically he can't even play because of his injury. So he gets to miss out on that. All good for him. But James, do you want to say just any condolences to Buffalo Sabres fans before we move on from them?
Just jump off the band. It's not even the bandwagon. Just get off the team, though. Do it for yourself. I feel like right now that movie Get Out, that scene, get out.
Oh no,
get out. Literally, just get out, please.
For yourselves, Buffalo, please, please, we care about you. So moving on from the Atlantic Division, we're gonna do a quick run through of the Metropolitan Division here. And James, first question, like I did with Montreal, I'm gonna throw it immediately to you. You know, we talked about teams that can challenge the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let's go in the Metropolitan and see if we can find people. The New York Islanders and the Carolina Hurricanes both faced off with the Tampa Bay Lightning in last year's playoffs. Carolina lost in, I believe it was 5, and the Islanders got it to Game 7, but then lost that Game 7, couldn't even register a goal. There's plenty of talent on both those teams when you look at the offense and the defense, and at least the goaltending situation, the Island is still pretty good with Varlamov and Sorokin. Carolina, not so much. Again, reference back to my winners and losers of the NHL offseason from weeks back. James, between the Islanders and the Hurricanes, most likely people are going to favor one of these teams to meet the Lightning in the conference finals. Which one of them, as of now, do you think would give the better challenge to Tampa Bay?
You know who I'm saying, Jurg. I'm going for my Islanders, baby. My number 2 team, but it's all right. I'm still going for them. We out here. I mean, they were already there with them, Jurg. They brought them all the way to a Game 7. They almost had it. And it's the second time in 2 years. So this would be the third time if they do meet in the playoffs again. And I hope so, because my God, the fireworks that would be. And honestly, it's just the hunger. They gotta have it, bro. Like, they just to get that close, doesn't matter the sport at all. It doesn't matter the numbers again at all. Just to get that close and to miss it and lose to the same people twice. You've seen it in basketball with Detroit. You've seen it with the MJ Chicago Bulls, where the teams lost multiple times, but in each time they lost, they learned something to help them get into that next round. And like we said, Tampa Bay doesn't have the depth they usually have anymore, which was one of their main advantages against the Islanders, because although the Islanders team is great and it is deep, Tampa Bay is slightly better and it has a lot more depth, used to. So now let's see if the Islanders can use their big bodied men and bruisers, and just, that would be the winner for me. Is you got to beat up on Tampa Bay Lightning and get them tired, because basically keep doing what you're doing, because now the fact that they don't have depth, it might finally take you there to the promised land.
And it's going to be interesting. I would, in a 7-game series, I definitely would favor the Islanders in terms of all these teams in the Metro to actually compete against Tampa Bay, because we've already seen it. They have competed with them. It's just all about what can they finally do to get over the hump. And I think a trade needs to be made for this Islanders team come the midway point. And I think, James, when you're to this point where the Islanders, we believe, even their rough start last season, because they didn't start last year so hot, and they also had a stretch towards the end of the season where they didn't play well at all, right? Like, you need to kind of clean that up a little bit if you're the Islanders. We need to see you be a more consistent team in this specific regular season, because I think, like you said, it's for the taking. And underrated thing, now, granted, it didn't matter in the playoff bubble because it was the bubble, but last year Tampa Bay had a home ice advantage when you think about it. If the Islanders can try to be better than Tampa Bay and they could try to get home ice advantage, I actually do believe that would make a difference for the Islanders this time around. I really do think it is. It's just something about Game 7 in hockey in your arena is something spectacular that players strive for, and I think the Islanders should be going for that. The Carolina Hurricanes, just a brief mention on them before we move on. My thing with them is, like I said, I had them as my loser in the offseason. I didn't like the fact that they lost Dougie Hamilton and didn't really do much to help out that defense at all. I think their defense is weaker this season than last season, when I thought last season they were actually one of the deeper blue lines in the league. And goaltending, they just got significantly worse, in my opinion. Funny enough, they got Frederik Andersen from the Toronto Maple Leafs in the offseason, and they also signed Antti Ranta. But the thing is that, you could have kept Nedeljkovic and Mrazek, who proved themselves to be very good last season. By the way, Nedeljkovic is in Detroit. Another reason why I think they'll be better than Ottawa. So I just did not like the offseason the Hurricanes had. They're still a playoff team to me, but I think this is the weakest Hurricanes playoff team that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years since their return to being a good team again. Moving on from that, speaking of good teams, will they finally fall off? The Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins, James. 2 teams with aging superstars. Both have won a cup. In the case of the Penguins, they've won 3 cups with Crosby and Malkin and Letang, that core that they have there. But both teams, I think, writing was on the wall. Once again, losing to the New York Islanders last season for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Washington Capitals as well. Just a ceremonial butt whooping they got in the first round. I think they lost in 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. I remember telling you before the playoffs, James, when we went into the Capitals and Bruins series, I said I think the Bruins are going to beat the Capitals and pretty handily. I didn't think that Capitals team could compete with Boston. And I just think at the end of the day, both teams are missing something critical and that's goaltending. I think with the Washington, and yes, there's other factors as well, but I think ultimately the Washington Capitals, Ilya Samsonov needs to prove himself this season. Like, this is a make or break season on what his trajectory in the NHL is supposed to be. And I think in Pittsburgh, Tristan Jarry, he's essentially Matt Murray, who is the former Pens goaltender, now current Ottawa Senators goalie. If I shot a beach ball at him, I'm kind of convinced the beach ball would go through Matt Murray on the shot. I really do. So when it comes to both teams, I think goaltending is the ultimate weakness. And James, as we talked about several times on this show, goaltending is the weakness. So when we talk about the Caps and the Pens, James, obviously two bona fide first ballot Hall of Famers on their teams when it comes to Crosby and Ovechkin, and then other Hall of Fame caliber players on both teams. You got Backstrom and Carlson on the Caps. You have Malkin and Letang on the Penguins. What can these two teams do this season to try to extend the window one more year to try to be good for their aging stars?
Honestly, for the Caps, I don't think there really is much they can do. They've taken a lot of hits, and they're just getting older. You really saw it in the last year. They did make it to the playoffs, but when they got into the playoffs, like you said the Bruins were going to beat them up. I even said, I didn't say it, but I thought it, that they were going to lose to the Bruins because that Bruins team is good. But regardless of that, just what I've heard and read, and just from seeing a couple games here and there, you can see that Capitals team is nowhere near the way they used to be. The talent's just lackluster. They're not playing with the same energy. And they're just it's messed up, but they're just old, man. It's as simple as that. Ovechkin, like you said, Hall of Famer, but you can see his skills, the injuries are catching up. His skills starting to, it sounds weird to say. It feels weird to say his skills declining slightly because this man just keeps scoring no matter what. But it is. And you see the grays, his beard is turning whiter and whiter as the day comes, man, So I think their window of opportunity is, if it's not closing, it's the window's cracked by like that much here. They don't really got it. It'd be a surprise if they make a deep playoff run, and it would be like this is for one more for Ovi, one more shot for Ovi. Essentially, that's the only way I see it happening. And even then, like I'm saying, don't feel good about it. As for the Penguins, because it just feels weird to say they got a better chance. It's not a great chance, but they do have a better chance. It's just the way they play. They got at least 1 or 2 more years, but it's getting there, and they might have to consider flipping. If it doesn't look great, like halfway through the year this year, I'd consider just starting it now instead of kicking the can down the road.
That's pretty interesting because I'm honestly kind of in that boat with both these teams. Now, not necessarily rebuilding, but I think both clubs need to take a serious look midway through the season. If they are not where they want to be, I think there's a case to be made to try to tear off some of the pieces from this team. I think, with the Capitals, Evgeny Kuznetsov was a massive disappointment last season, and I think there was real talk, myself especially, I thought he could have and maybe should have been traded this past offseason. I really do. I think the same thing with the Penguins, just that blue line, like this is the tricky thing with the Penguins. They have like 5 or 6 decent blue liners, but not great, right? Like they're technically deep. They have like 6, 7, 8 guys who could play well, like decent at the NHL level. But that's the thing; they're all decent. Like Chris Letang, he's not the same guy. I mean, he had a good year last season. I will give credit. Like Chris Letang, he's looked the last couple seasons to kind of be bouncing back a little bit when he's not hurt. But man, oh man, that team just does not feel like the same team that won back-to-back cups. I think for both teams, like you said, if their window isn't completely shut, it's a little sliver. It's like a centimeter left for both of them. And I think it's only apropos when we talk about this, because this will be the last talking point. We're going to rush through this really fast as well. But to me, the Philadelphia Flyers and the New York Rangers are 2 enigmas coming into this upcoming season. The Flyers had a lot of expectations, going into last season when they had a good run in the bubble. Completely fell apart, right? Like, just offensive players didn't perform well. The defense fell off. Carter Hart had a disastrous sophomore campaign. Just nothing went right for the Flyers. And then for the New York Rangers, just back-to-back years of complete inconsistency from them. They were in the playoff race until like the final couple days of the season. But again, it's that inconsistency where it's like they'll have a good month, James, and then they won't. And I think both these teams, they tried to make strides in the summer to fix that. I think with the Rangers, they traded for Sammy Blais from the St. Louis Blues, who throws the body around. They traded for Barclay Goodrow, who throws the body around. See where I'm going with some of these names here. They want to get a little bit tougher and more physical to be able to compete in this division. I think it kind of makes sense when you look at some of these teams here, because the Capitals are still big. The New York Islanders, like we mentioned, James, like they're a big team. Palmieri, Anders Lee, they're not afraid to throw the body around. They literally have a line or two that their whole purpose is just to literally just get hits and block shots, right? So when you consider that, it definitely made sense what the Rangers did. They have the superstar in Artemi Panarin. And I think this could potentially be their year if Igor Shesterkin takes that next step in net. And then I think with the Philadelphia Flyers, they're interesting. Their defense completely fell apart last season. While the offense could have and should have been better, I think the end of the day, it was the defensive side of things. Carter Hart played terrible, and the defense had to get better. Well, they got rid of Shane Gostisbehere. They added Rasmus Ristolainen. They added Ryan Ellis. Travis Sanheim is still there. And they have even Ivan Provorov, who he's there to set up the offense, right? Like Provorov is the offensive defenseman. Let these other guys kind of be those two-way players, help the defense, help out Carter Hart. Do you think, as we talk about the Caps and Penguins, and let this be the final, exclamation point for this, for our NHL talk here, James, between the Flyers and Rangers, do you think one of them makes the playoffs or maybe both of them? Like, is this finally the year where both these teams like take that next step?
I really want to say the Rangers are going to take that next step, but you don't know with all the moves that just happened in the offseason. I'm not even talking about on the ice. I'm talking about the front office because they have a new head coach. Honestly, I like the name's escaping me. Jurg, what's his name? It's going to kill me once you say it. Old Rangers head coach.
No, the head coaching change was needed. Gerard Gallant was an excellent addition.
It was an excellent addition, but I had no issues with what's his name?
The former Rangers head coach?
Yes.
I'm not even gonna.
Okay, regardless, either way. Oh man, it's killing me. I gotta look this up real quick. Sorry, guys, hang on. It's gonna kill me. We gotta find it out right now. David Quinn. There you go. It was gonna kill me. But regardless, I like David Quinn. From the Rangers games I saw, I heard him talk every Monday on the radio too. There was no reason I didn't like the guy, but they did end up getting a way better coach, in my opinion. But also, it seemed like it was more of a talent thing. It really depends. Can they take that next step? They need Igor Shesterkin. That's the right guy, right? I said his name right. There you go. Igor Shesterkin. They need Igor to take that next step to become that lockdown goaltender. And just offensively, I need to see more. It's just you haven't seen enough, and hopefully we see some different schemes because I'm personally not a fan in hockey of the try to be quick scheme, try to be athletic scheme, because it's just not the hockey I prefer. I prefer the bruisers because that's why I see in the playoffs all the time, and that's what real championship winning hockey looks like to me. Unfortunately, David Quinn's, it was kind of like I would compare it to the West Coast offensive football. It's just straight, quick action, slants. It's nothing pretty, but it's just quick and efficient. So that's why I think the Rangers could have a shot if they do have the correct head coach and the system is placed in properly.
I will say, to me, the X factor for them will be if their last two top picks, the former number one pick in Alexis Lafreniere and the former number two pick in Capo Caco. I think those two need to step up. I think the time, at least for Caco especially, like, you need to have the season we expect from you now. You need to have this 20, 25 goal season on this team. You need to earn your spot in that top six. Both of them do. Like, you need to be there. Because if they can step up, if they can both have 40, 50-point seasons along with Panarin, who we know is going to put up 90 points in a full regular season again, the Rangers have a shot. They really do. And I think Gerard Gallant being there was an excellent addition. Like, all due respect to David Quinn, Gerard Gallant's just better than you.
You don't even know David Quinn's name. Don't say respect.
I don't. You're not wrong. But at the end of the day, I think the Rangers have a shot. But like I said, these are two deep divisions here. Like, the top five on paper for both, it's competitive, and two of them are going to miss out, and I'm going to be interested to see. Flyers, kind of the same thing. They need Carter Hart to take that next step ultimately. And if their blue line can come together this season, they kind of like they made a couple of these trades. They got rid of Nolan Patrick to bring in Ellis. They traded a lot to get Rasmus Ristolainen. Again, check back. Good callback to the offseason stuff that we did, James. But make sure you listen back because I definitely talked about the Flyers in my winners and losers. For the Flyers, it's kind of like a go big or go home thing. Like, they need to make the playoffs this year. And Alain Vigneault and that squad, I hope for their sake, because I am still a big Carter Hart fan. I hope for their sake that they do make a run this year, because if they don't, it's going to be problems in Philadelphia, man, because that team should be winning. No excuses.
I do want to make one more point on the Rangers. People do forget that Panarin had that issue with the whole Russian story of the allegations, and he did have a couple weeks. It was pretty late, almost a month, I think, if not more, that lengthy absence he took because of just all the off the ice things going on with Russia. And
well, at the end of the season as well, when you think about it, because he got hurt by that.
And that too.
He got hurt by that absolute goofball Tom Wilson. So
That's right. I forgot Tommy the Dummy Wilson. But what's it called? Yeah, just everything that happened there. They were going, they were hot. And then all this happened. They had a lot of resilience. So that's why also I believe the Rangers are going to make it. But,
fair points, fair points. And hey, look, for every sport, it's the same thing. If the Rangers are good, James, like that's better for the league, right? It's just better for the league when New York is doing good in sports. It just is, man. We need the Garden to be bumping for the Rangers, this season. We need that to happen again, especially with the Islanders' new arena. By the way, like the Islanders' new arena looks pretty good.
Where is the new arena?
It's in Elmont, I believe.
In Elmont, I got family out there.
Hey, I got friends who could drive there. We're trying to go to some games this season. We out, James?
You know me, I'll go. And it won't be like the Coliseum, though, Jurg. It won't. But it's okay.
You're not wrong. But speaking of going to games, ladies and gentlemen, there are going to be some big games coming up here in Major League Baseball pretty soon. Actually, some friends of mine are already trying to procure tickets to the wild card games. Assuming the Yankees are definitely going to be there. The MLB playoffs are upon us. They are a week away. James, paint the picture like the artist you are for all the people. Let everyone know what's going on in the playoffs because it's winning time now this last week in the season.
There is so much going on in the AL East. It is literally just it's a drama. It's a soap opera. I don't know how else to say it. Literally, from yesterday, I was listening to the stats with the number of games that are left for the Yankees and the Blue Jays. If the Yankees win 5 or combined, if the Yankees win and the Blue Jays lose, a total of 5 games. So let's say the Yankees win 2 this series and then the Blue Jays lose 1 after this series coming up. The Yankees are in. So I hope that it's confusing. I know it's a little basic math, but it's confusing the way I explained it. Or let's say the Yankees win because, 1 Yankee win would count as 2 games out of those 5 games they need because 1 loss for the Blue Jays and 1 win for the Yankees. But regardless, so things got interesting yesterday with the Yankees because they won against the Blue Jays 7-2 for the last AL wildcard spot. So they're currently, the Yankees got the 2 games. But as we speak, bottom of the third, Blue Jays are up 3-0. So if the Blue Jays win, that third game is almost like it's a game 7 or like it's already a playoff game because that could determine the entire outcome because the Yankees very well could get swept by the Rays. And this is coming up last series they have. And it's just insane. It's literally 5 games, including tonight, left in the Yankee season. And you're on the edge of your seat. You're on your toes. But Giancarlo Stanton, that man has been playing lights out lately. You want to say they could do it, but you're worried because they're on this hot streak that they've been on all season, as always, up and down. And you got to be curious, is it going to end again right when you don't need it to not end? Because that is the last thing you need to see right now. So that's what's happening on in the AL East. It's nothing really crazy. It's like we've been updating you guys all for the last 2 weeks almost. Nothing really in the entire league has changed playoff-wise aside from that AL East. We've been keeping eyes on this for almost 3 weeks, sure, because that was really the only race left. Almost everybody clinched up their spots. You had the Cardinals yesterday clinch their second wild card spot. Nolan Arenado, just quick notes and facts, guys. Nolan Arenado said he cannot wait to come back next year. He is not opting out. So St. Louis fans rejoice. You are keeping one of the greatest guys. And honestly, man, we said it with Logan 2-3 weeks ago. This Cardinals team, man, they're on fire.
And with Kenson last week, like we've been talking about the Cardinals for like the last month worth of shows because they're doing good.
I mean, the last month they've been doing nothing but winning, so of course we're going to be talking about them. But also, speaking about the Cardinals, in the NL Central Division, you had the Milwaukee Brewers who actually clinched the division. They clinched it, I believe it was last week. We briefly mentioned it. They have a major case on their hand. A relief pitcher, Devin Williams, who has been lights out. He had a little rough patch in the middle of the season, but he's been lights out since the second half of the season. He fractured his hand after punching a wall. So, yes, fractured. He did a la Amari Stoudemire, punched a wall, minus the fire hydrant, and he ended up with a fracture. This is a huge, devastating blow for the Milwaukee Brewers because Everyone knows pitching is their only weakness. Offensively, yes, they're not sexy, but it gets the job done. They love playing that small ball. They get a home run every once in a while, and they play defense. And you had a two-headed dragon in Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff, who Woodruff had a little rough end to the season, but I have zero doubt in my mind come playoff time, he would have locked it down. So you got to question: is the Brewers just going to screw this up and just completely fumble it like they usually do in the playoffs? My guess is yes. We take a look at the NL East really quick. The Braves are currently up 3.5 games. It's pretty obvious they're going to lock it up, in my opinion. They kind of got the same situation going. No, the Phillies got the same situation going, excuse me, as the Yankees do, but it's nowhere near as close. And just a lot. The Phillies need to win, and the Braves need to get on this terrible losing streak. So that's why I do feel like it's out of their hands. But they are in the series with the Phillies right now. So let's see what happens. Braves are up 2-1, bottom of the second. It's these last two games, and the Braves do play my Mets in the last one. If my Mets could get, I don't even know what team I hate more, the Braves or the Phillies. It's just like, I want to say Braves because you know the history, but I just hate Philadelphia so much, Jurg. Like you know how much I hate Philadelphia. It's the worst city in the world, honestly. Sorry, Philly fans, not really, but either way.
That's that shot to that one Philly fan that Bars got in an argument with a couple months back.
Let's not get into it. Regardless, you look at the AL one more time. White Sox locked it up. Astros, they haven't locked anything up. It's questionable what's going to happen. Not that it's not questionable. They locked it up basically. It's the Mariners, same situation. They need to lose a bunch of games, but I don't see them happening. Actually, fun fact: I have the Astros making it to the World Series out of the AL. It's up for grabs. It's anyone's game to grab, and they got the best pitching out of all the teams that currently have a playoff spot. The White Sox also have 3-game suspension for Tim Anderson. Don't have the details yet. We will tweet about it if you guys keep your eyes open for that. I believe it had something to do with an argument he got with an umpire. We'll double check on that. But regardless, that is the news and notes from the MLB. Like we said, everything's pretty much been set and solid for a couple of weeks, aside from the fact that the Cardinals won. Besides the fact that they clinched the second wild card spot, they have won their 17th game in a row. So as we've been talking about them for the entire month, Jurg, rightfully so. Regardless, if I was a Cardinal fan, I wouldn't mind losing one right before the playoffs. Just saying, you never want to go into the playoffs with that hot of a streak. Looking at you, Yankees. But let's see what happens. Other than that, guys, we'll try and tweet, keep everybody updated on all these other cool things happening. Last fun fact of the MLB. With the Giants winning 103 games, they tied for the third highest mark in team history. And that'll be it for the MLB update here, guys.
So I have a couple quick questions here, for this MLB stuff. James, the Seattle Mariners, what the hell? This team, I completely forgot about them this entire time. And as I kept looking back the last 2 days, and heck, even today, like before the show, when I was looking at the standings, I'm like, the Seattle Mariners are second in the division? What? What are the chances here, James, that the Mariners take one of these AL wildcard spots? It's real, right?
It certainly is real. That's the
do they not hold? Am I wrong? Do they not hold the second wildcard spot at the moment, or no?
I believe they do. They're tied for the second, or they're holding the first, but they're up there. They do have a realistic shot. It's just that's honestly, Jurgen, I don't know what to tell you about the Mariners right now. My eyes are open right now to them. That yes, we expected them to be not a good team, but they showed they were better last year than a lot of people thought. And they did it again this year and took a major step forward. At beginning of the season, wasn't looking hot. But as of late, you can't stop them. And honestly, you got to figure it has to be all that young talent they got is finally all putting it together and working together. If you look at Jarred Kelenic, I think he's still not looking hot, but just his presence alone defensively and the fact that he has the potential to be a hot bat. Let's just pull up his recent stats as of late. Yeah, he's still not doing hot, but it's all right. Because let's say they do fumble it and they don't get this wild card spot. If I'm a Seattle Mariner fan, I'm feeling pretty damn good going into next season just with the way we finished. But if you do get a playoff spot, you end up feeling like a New York Knicks fan because none of this was expected at all. And here you are holding a playoff. You could get swept. You could lose the first game. Whatever it may be. You're happy to be there. So, I mean, there's no explanation for it other than maybe it's finally time. Who really thought come around this time that the Seattle Mariners would possibly have the chance? Not saying it's going to happen yet, but they're only 2 wins away. Possibly have the chance at 90 wins. Well, it looked at you crazy.
I think we all would have just looked at that person like, yeah, get out. Just leave the room. Leave the room and keep your opinions to yourself. Like 90 wins Seattle Mariners, sure. And here we are, like you said, all this time later. Like I just find it wild. Now, granted, I think when they face the Yankees, I think the Yankees are going to smoke them.
Oh,
but
for sure.
Just like you said, the fact you were not supposed to make it to this point. It's kind of like it's that it's that Plankton meme where it's like if they make the wild card game, it's like, what are you going to do now? It's like, I don't know. I didn't think I'd get this far. Like you're the Mariners, like obviously they're going to play the game, but it's just like no one expected them to make this kind of progress. Like you said, the Mariners have kind of been an up and down team. Like I think it was a couple of seasons ago where they started off hot. They were like 14-2 to start off a season, and then they lost like 20 of the next like 22 or something, and it came crashing down to earth once again for that team. But clearly not with the Mariners. I think it makes it interesting. Well, like you said, I think the Astros are ultimately going to clinch and keep the AL West. I think that like the Mariners are highly entertaining to me in terms of who knows if they could get this upset ultimately when it comes against the Yankees. Now, granted, while I do think the Yankees are going to try to make it so that they could get Garrett Cole up on the mound for that one game wild card, I think the Mariners. I know we mentioned in episode 1 of season 2 here, I said I wanted to see the Blue Jays. We talked about the Red Sox Yankees being the potential wild card matchup. Mariners it'd be a sneaky game. I think it would be a very sneaky game in regards to that. James, I just want to quick hits here. Why have the Blue Jays fallen off? Because while the Tampa Bay series they lost 2 or 3 against Tampa Bay, and that the Robbie Ray start loss kind of shocked me because Robbie Ray was outstanding for them, consistently this season.
I think he wins the Cy Young, to be honest. He's been amazing. He's been the best pitcher in the AL.
Yeah, he has his off start. They come back with the win. Yes, they lose to the Rays, but it wouldn't be so bad if, and ultimately, they split with the Twins, their last series. The Twins got 2 of those games, and that was just big. Like, why have the Blue Jays just collapsed here, like in this latter part that we talked about? Because we mentioned it's like, if the Blue Jays, are you going to fall off at the wrong time? And it looks like it's happening to them.
Honestly, I think that's just as simple as that. It's baseball, and you have your hot hands, you have your cold hands, and it just seems like they went cold at the wrong moment, but they're still fighting. This is really where we're going to see if they are the team we thought they are, because it was really, everyone thought they were making the playoffs this season, or at least had a fighting shot, which they're proving they did, especially with the acquisitions of Marcus Semien, George Springer. You're adding veterans to that young blood, which is helping them get that championship mentality. Marcus Semien never won one, but you do have George Springer, who is a former World Series champion. Whether or not he used the buzzer remains to be unknown. But regardless, you do have someone who won a ring, and you do have someone who, Marcus Semien, I've been preaching about him since God knows when. The beginning of season 1, he was my early MVP candidate. I ended season 1 with him as my MVP candidate still, because I think he's been one of the best things. He just broke the record for most home runs by a second baseman in a single season. So, regardless, I think they do have a shot still. I mean, clearly they still have a shot. That's why we're talking about it right now. Toronto's up 4-0 against the Yankees, top of the 4th. But it's the pitching. Their pitching was holding them down. Yes, I did say Robbie Ray was going to I did say he was going to win a Cy Young, but he did have that unfortunate big game. That's not something you need. That's like a Garrett Cole giving up and losing the game. Any game for the Yankees, Garrett Cole pitches, you need to win. So with Robbie Ray, you needed to win that game. That was a major game to let go. And then Ryu, I don't want to mess his name up, but regardless, he also is a great pitcher as well. And it's their bullpen's been shaky. It's the pitching's been shaky. You need a little more consistency there, and they just went cold. But other than that, they're ready to go. They need to take that next step. Simple as that. You want people to take you serious, make it into the playoffs.
Last questions here. So that's about all my questions for the AL. Let's move on to the NL, James, really fast. Giants or Dodgers? who ultimately takes the division. I don't think the Giants have clinched, if I'm not mistaken. I think the Dodgers still have a chance here. So
No, the
who
Giants did not clinch.
who do you think is going to take that division ultimately? Do you just give it to the Giants because they have the lead in the last week?
Oh, I want to say the Giants, but it's just like it doesn't feel right to go against the Dodgers, and like if
Well, they scare you, right? The Dodgers scare you.
who don't they scare? You know what? I'm gonna say the Giants clinch the division, but ultimately the Dodgers make it further into the playoffs because you just look at that starting lineup and that scares you more than anything. You're talking Max Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw, Walker Bueller. The list goes on, and just forget about the talent they have on the offensive side. It's been a little lackluster this season, but if they could figure it out, which by no means am I worried that they're not going to figure it out, they, I calling it right now, Jurg. It's going to be a Los Angeles Dodgers, Houston Astros World Series
Rematch. Ooh. Yeah, I mean, you don't need to
Mm,
make the pick. We'll go into that in a future episode.
okay, we'll
Let's
hold it. We'll hold
save
it.
the picks, James. Come on now
We'll hold it. We'll
for the
hold it.
program. May have to edit that out, for the podcast. It makes sense. I think the Dodgers are ultimately, no, excuse me, the Giants are ultimately going to keep their hold on it. But like you said, the Dodgers, they're just so overwhelming. Now, granted, the Cardinals are very hot, and I think a Dodgers Cardinals 1-game wild card is absolutely crazy. But I think the Dodgers, they are favored to repeat. As they should, because they are just that supremely talented. And at the end of the day, they're just that team, man. They're just that team. Hell, the ability to in game one of the wild in the 1-game wild card, in game one of the NLDS, in game one of the NLCS, and game one of the World Series, like if they go that entire way, can you imagine having the privilege of being like, all right, do we want to start Kershaw? Do we want to start Bueller? Do we want to start Scherzer? Like who? No one has that.
You
That
gotta
just
go
sounds so
Scherzer.
wild.
You gotta go Scherzer all the
No,
way.
but I'm just saying you have the options to be able to do that. Like you
Yeah,
cannot be
it's not.
concerned. Like the ability to, if they get to a game 5 in the NLDS, like the ability to be like, you know what, we're gonna pitch Scherzer here because then we got Kershaw, Bueller in the NLCS for game 1. Like that's a cheat code of a different kind, man. That
That's
just is.
It's a fantasy team, literally. Someone traded with the last place team. And the guy didn't realize he got robbed. That's 100% what it is. That's all it is.
That kind of thing may or may not have happened in the OTB and fantasy football league that we do. Just FYI, I have no idea actually if it did because I'm not even in the league. But so kind of last questions here, James. When Kenton was on last week, he had the Braves as his team that could potentially make a run as his dark horse. Just early, we're gonna get more into the details of this next week, right? Or the week after when we do our proper MLB playoff breakdown. But in your mind, what do you view like? What can the Braves do to maybe not upset the Brewers, but what advantages could the Braves potentially have going against the Brewers, assuming the Braves hold out against the Phillies and they take the NL East?
Honestly, it all comes down to if that offense could get through Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff. Because I already stated their bullpen isn't deep, well, they're missing their second most important pitcher out of that bullpen, and Devin Williams with him fracturing his hand. So if you could get through that two-headed monster of potential Cy Young candidates, then all is good. At least get one win out of those two. And it's understandable if you can't get both, but if you can at least get one, it's like you took one at home. You took one from the home team while you were away. So if they could at least get one of those games, I have full confidence because I got more faith in the Atlanta Braves offensively than I do in the Milwaukee Brewers offense. The only thing is that bullpen is just scary for the Atlanta Braves. That bullpen needs to get it together as well. If that bullpen and rotate everything about their pitching, if they could just play average at most, because the offense, they could support average. They need average. They cannot get blown up. It's honestly, I feel like I'm talking about literally the Atlanta Braves and the Atlanta Braves light right now, but it's not. It's unfortunately the Brewers got the two pitchers, which is why I'm saying if they could steal that one game and the pitching is average, Braves got it all.
If only the Braves were healthy, because if Acuna and Soroka were healthy for this playoff run, whew.
And the Braves would have been locked it up if those two were healthy for a fact. But Hopefully we see Soroka on the field again, man. It hurts me just thinking about
Right?
what happened to him every time.
Can you think about like just 2 years ago, Soroka, Max Fried, like the Braves pitching staff was looking good.
Yep.
And like just
Yep.
injuries are hurting these guys. It just sucks to see because there's just like that team has potential and talent. They really do. And it's like it's almost about to be like they're gonna have like another decade long run of like being a playoff caliber team, but they just can't get it done because something gets in the way every single time. And that just sucks, honestly. It really does. Final question here in regards to it. And I know I did just mention the Braves because I do believe they will ultimately hold out with the NL East. But any chance the Phillies can somehow shock them? Like, and if the Phillies can somehow pull it out, what are their odds, if any, that you give them in the playoffs?
I don't give if they do somehow pull it out, I don't give the Phillies really much more credit. I don't think they're gonna make it far because their pitching is just way worse than the Braves is. But and offensively, I just like the Braves better. It might just be honestly, I hate the Phillies. They really could be. I'm just looking at them at like brown colored glasses, but I just something about the Phillies. It just never. It feels like they're always a step away. It feels like they're that team that's always just gonna mess up. So until proven otherwise, I don't see the Phillies. They offensively, they're not bad. It's just their pitching and defensively is just so. I don't see them really doing anything that could really get them to get that advantage. They would need the Braves to start screwing up right now, this second, for them to really have a shot.
Makes a ton of sense when you think about it. Kind of sucks because Bryce Harper's actually had a pretty good season. He's actually had a really good year when you look at it. And at the end of the day, for Bryce, like just this team in general, like for the Phillies, I feel like they're one of these teams when we get into the offseason eventually in a couple weeks here. The MLB offseason is going to be a fun time for us here on BNB, kind of like what we did with the NHL offseason. We're going to have James give a full breakdown of some of these teams because there are teams, James, when they look into this offseason, whether they miss the playoffs or if they flame out in the playoffs, changes need to be made.
It's going to be a hot kitchen, Jerk. It's going to be hot. But, that's other than that, there's really. I'm just excited for the playoffs, Jurg. It just needs to get here finally because I feel like we've been doing a disservice to people repeating almost the same news over and over again. But regardless, unfortunately, until next time, this is the end of this week. We will start off next week with a hot, on fire kitchen of, the playoffs and whatever NHL news comes forward to us. But Jurg, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Any last comments for the people before we sign off here?
Just make sure you follow us at Bunts&Bruises on Twitter. We got over 100 followers. You want to keep on growing. We're super thankful for all of you. Make sure you, of course, you follow the Off the Ball Network as well. The amazing network that we're a part of. Just follow, like, share, just do everything. Literally, like James always says, I'll make the joke this week. If you only listen to 3 minutes of the podcast, I think it counts as a listen. So just do that. Scroll to the end. It's all we want, guys.
Volume on low. You don't even gotta listen. Volume on low. It's okay. But regardless, you heard the man. 5 stars. Please subscribe, like, tell your mom, tell your dog, tell your mom's mom, tell them all. Until next time, guys, have a great one.